Canada is officially in the middle of not one, but two trade wars. On one side, rising tensions with the United States. On the other, a sudden economic strike from China that's already hitting home hard. As of Thursday, China slapped massive new tariffs on key Canadian exports. We're talking a 100% levy on canola oil, canola meal, and peas, plus a 25% duty on seafood and pork. For farmers, fishers, and processors, this isn't just bad news. It's catastrophic. The timing? Brutal. Seeding season is just weeks away. Operating costs are already through the roof. And now, farmers are being told their biggest customer, China, might be off the table. Tara Sawyer, an Alberta grain farmer managing over 4,000 acres, says it best. What's already been challenging is now devastating. Why is this happening? Well, it's retaliation. Last year, Canada announced its own tariffs, 100% on Chinese-made electric vehicles and 25% on aluminum and steel. The federal government said China was flooding North America with cheap, subsidized EVs, threatening local auto jobs and industry. The US made the same move. China hit back. In response, China launched anti-dumping investigations into Canadian canola in late 2024, and now the hammer has dropped. One economist called it a punitive number, not a careful calculation, but a message. And the message is loud. China isn't backing down. The ripple effects already being felt. Some canola exporters say this shuts the door on a $5 billion market overnight. Others are watching prices fall fast as products meant for China flood the domestic market. And this is just the start. Let's break down what China is targeting and how deep the damage goes. The biggest blow is to canola oil and meal, which now face a crushing 100% tariff. That's not a slight increase, it's a total shutdown of viability. Add in peas, and you've got three core exports suddenly priced out of China's market. The Canola Council of Canada says, last year alone, trade with China generated almost $5 billion. $1 billion of that came just from canola meal. With the new tariffs, that revenue could vanish. China isn't just another customer. For canola specifically, it's the top export market. Losing it sends shockwaves through farms, processors, and entire towns that rely on this trade to survive. And the hits keep coming. A 25% tariff now applies to Canadian seafood and pork, two more pillars of the export economy. The Fisheries Council of Canada is calling it an existential threat. That's not an exaggeration. According to the federal government, $1.3 billion in fish and seafood were shipped to China last year. Some markets, like geoduck clams from British Columbia and elvers from the Maritimes, rely almost entirely on Chinese buyers. And pork? It's Canada's third largest export market after the US and Japan. Over $43 million worth was sold to China in the past year alone. That market just got a whole lot harder to access. Economists are sounding alarms. Morningstar DBRS warns the tariffs could trigger a $1 billion hit to the Canadian economy. The Canola Council estimates that from 2019 to 2020, previous tariffs from China cost the industry up to $2.35 billion. This new round could be even worse. What's more terrifying is that this isn't isolated damage, it's rippling. Canola prices are already dropping as producers scramble to offload what they can domestically. That puts pressure on local supply chains, processors, and communities. Farms may be forced to lay off workers. Some might shut down entirely. Eric Johnson, an economist with BMO Capital Markets, put it bluntly, if you're a processor, you're going to feel the pressure in a much more meaningful way going forward. So why is China doing this now? It all goes back to Canada's decision last year to impose 100% tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, along with a 25% tax on aluminum and steel. The federal government accused China of unfairly subsidizing its EV industry, flooding North America with cheap electric cars that could crush Canada's auto sector. These weren't one-off decisions. They closely mirrored moves made by the US, which also took a hard line on Chinese EVs, and from China's perspective, this looked like a coordinated economic assault. In retaliation, China launched anti-dumping investigations into Canadian canola products last September, a clear warning shot. Then on March 8th, Beijing announced the new tariffs. 2 weeks later, they were in effect. Daniel Treffler, an economist at the University of Toronto, described the 100% tariff on canola oil as a punitive number made up by the Chinese regime. In other words, this wasn't about balancing trade. It was about punishing Canada. But this isn't a brand new feud. Tensions between Canada and China have been building since at least 2019, when Canada detained Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou at the request of the US. In retaliation, China targeted canola exports back then too, and also detained multiple Canadian nationals. Since then, attempts to normalize relations have stumbled. And just this month, tensions escalated further when it was revealed that China executed 4 Canadians for drug-related crimes in 2025, a move some experts see as deeply political. It's becoming clear this isn't just a trade dispute. It's a full-scale diplomatic breakdown, with economic weapons on both sides. Canada now finds itself in a dangerously tight position, retaliated against by China, and still managing uncertainty with its largest trading partner, the United States. As Eric Johnson puts it, there's been some effort to diversify away from China for years, but a lot of that shift moved toward the US, and now even that feels unstable. On the ground, the reaction is overwhelming: confusion, frustration, and fear. Tara Sawyer, the Alberta grain farmer we mentioned earlier, says the stress is relentless. Where are we going to be selling that canola, or can we? She asks. It's really stressful, and it's changing all the time. There's so much uncertainty. And that uncertainty is personal. Sawyer isn't just worried about numbers, she's worried about mental health. Not just her own, but for the entire farming community. Everybody is struggling with what to do, she says. Across Canada, entire industries are bracing for impact. The Fisheries Council of Canada says the 25% seafood tariff could effectively cut off 83% of Canada's seafood export markets, a devastating statistic for coastal economies. The government response? Mixed, and in some cases, underwhelming. Agriculture Minister Cody Blois says Ottawa is looking at all tools in the toolbox, including business risk management programs. But for producers already deep in debt and struggling with rising costs, that might not be enough. In Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith announced that the province has set aside $4 billion to respond to tariffs, double what it had last year. She even joked about doubling her bacon intake as a sign of support for pork producers. But jokes aside, the pressure is very real. Manitoba included hundreds of millions in its